Hey everyone, welcome to the Black Mental Wellness Lounge. I am super excited today. We are doing something different today. We're collaborating with Black and Mental Health, a Twitter movement, a social media movement, really designed to encourage and engage with those people, a part of the African diaspora, in who are working in mental health, want to be in mental health, interested in mental health, and so we're collaborating then with their Black and Mental Health Week. That is September 20th through the 26th. And so we're collaborating today. I'm so excited to have two special guests, co-founders of this movement, to really have a really good, open conversation about toxic masculinity. Big phrase, something that we probably heard about a lot, but maybe haven't gotten into the nuances of it and really how it connects to mental health and mental wellness. And so I want to bring up my special guest today. I first and foremost want to say thank you all for joining and what you do outside of this and the work that you do, and for founding, co-founding Black in mental health. And so I want to have you all introduce yourself. Broderick actually has been here before and is no stranger to the Black Mental Wellness Lounge. So Manny, I want to kick it to you and have you introduce yourself to the lounge.
Sure. I'm Manny J. Garcia, and I'm a doctoral student in clinical psychology at the City University of New York Graduate Center, John Jay campus. I work as a researcher at an organization called Social Insights Research, led by a Black woman, really amazing team that focuses on liberatory research and methods. And I work with Broderick, thanks to Broderick, at the Racial Trauma Center at Genesee Valley Psychology as an educator and abolitionist. And I'm really happy to be here. I've been wanting to be on this show for a long time.
I didn't pay him to say it. It's all love. Absolutely, man. Yeah, Manny and I connected on Twitter and have been following each other for quite some time and supporting each other. And so it's just as much of an honor to have you on as well. And so, Broderick, you've been here before. Can you reintroduce yourself to the Black Mental Wellness Lounge?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thanks for having us here, first and foremost. So I guess what do I do? Diversity consultant, meditation teacher, activist, and most recently, since I last been on here, we had opened the Racial Trauma Center with Genesee Valley Psychology, where we really focus on educating digitally and engage in a lot of different ways to disperse mental health information in an accessible way, as well as build community digitally, which is also a reflection of the Black Mental Wellness Lounge and the Black and Mental Health Initiative. And when we're really excited to be here and excited to really sink our teeth in to this particular topic, which has a lot to do with the focus of the Racial Trauma Center, which is training in countertransference and how certain societal beliefs and behaviors are projected onto our work. No matter how hard we try to be conscious of it, it sneaks really behind our subconscious minds. And masculinity is a pretty big one. So thanks for having us here.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a big one. And again, I would encourage anyone, if you haven't seen Broderick's video, definitely jump over to that. Go look in our archives. It's around mindfulness meditation. Definitely a good one. So definitely check that out if you haven't seen it. So, all right, let's dig into this conversation. Toxic masculinity. It may mean some different things to different people. Again, I think it's gotten classified as like one of those, buzzwords that we talk about now, like toxic masculinity, social justice, diversity, equity, inclusion. Like it fits into that bucket of just like, a hot button thing to talk about. But it really has some implications for us. So let's just start. First of all, we're talking about what is it? Like, what is toxic masculinity? How would you define it? Manny, I'll start with you.
I was hoping you could start.
as you were pondering.
Yeah, I don't know the formal definition, but I I do believe in masculine and feminine energies, that these energies exist. And the first thing that my mind went to, that we talk about at the Racial Trauma Center a lot, is this idea of I can't remember the word that we use, but that an individualism, that an individual on their own must be strong, must dominate, right? Must be the focus of attention, must impose their will on others. That's a really simple thing to start with. It gets really complicated in the Black community because people who identify as Black men, so I identified as male until very recently when I changed my pronouns to they, them. But I'm 48 years old. I've spent my entire life identifying as a male. And if I walk outside, I present as very masculine. And so there's also, I think now, the way it's changed for me personally is feeling pressured to have the way you look define the way you act, and the way you feel, and the way you express yourself, right? Because I'm 6 foot tall, big guy, big broad shoulders. Apparently, I can be intimidating to people, right? Even if I'm not trying to be, right? And so when you become aware of that power that you have, deciding how to use it, I think, is where masculinity can become toxic, right? Because if you're bigger and stronger than others, particularly women, and even more particularly Black women, dominating the conversation, dominating the space, not respecting kindness, not respecting compassion, having an issue with weakness, right? So often when we talk about masculinity too, it's like women versus men.
Right.
So that's a part of the philosophy that I think is toxic, right? That there isn't a competition. And then often the other thing I think about is when you talk about feminism, Black feminism in particular, that it's not the opposite of masculinity, like we're going to just get rid of all men, right? That actually it's about unity, it's about community, it's about kindness. Yes, there's always strength, right? We need our strength. We're people that wouldn't be here without our strength, but not allowing our strength to dominate others, right? Particularly Black women. So I'm reminded of a conversation, really cool read between James Baldwin and Audre Lorde about toxic Black male masculinity against women, and the struggle when you're demasculated by society, right?
Right.
And beat down and seen as a threat when you're not a threat. And then Audre Lorde, I think it was Audre Lorde, I hope that I'm saying that right, her perspective saying, but that should never be taken out on Black women. I hear you, brother. I hear you. I hear your pain for Black men. However, it should never be an option to take it out on Black women. Any women, of course,
right,
but especially Black women. And I want to extend that to all identities, all gender identities. So being stuck in a binary, male and female is another remnant of that. So that's for me a starting place for it. And I'm actually very curious what Broderick's going to say, because I like the way he conceptualizes it.
Man, bro, I just start talking. You know me. I don't know. I can only base this on my own experience. So I'll just talk. I'll just frame toxic masculinity from my literal, personal experience of it with myself and with my mental health.
Sure.
I think toxicity is a measure of imbalance. Anything with too much, right, can become toxic. So I would say toxic masculinity is a level of imbalanced domination, a tendency to dominate or to annihilate or to take or to push or to, there's a doing sort of energy. Whereas feminine energy to me is more open, receptive, and nurturing. And toxic masculinity to me is a reflection of the gender roles society presses onto us in a categorical fashion rather than a spectrum. So then me as a man, I only think, I'm only allowed to show anger, right? Rather than just being allows your body, your emotions, your mind to just flutter wherever it flutters in the moment. But these societal categories of how a man is supposed to act or how a woman is supposed to act ends up putting us into these categories of emotional experience, categories of connection, categories of the ideal family structure. You see where this is going? All of these just made up categories rather than letting nature dictate what it is we are. And when we try to define ourselves apart from nature, and try to think our way into these boxes that are then reinforced by society, and we're all quite uncomfortable not having this super fluid ability to, as a woman, be able to feel more masculine, powerful, and dominate, and then no one calls her hysterical or the B word or different things like that. And then a man can be receptive and nurturing, and people don't call him sensitive, or we see all of the smoke that Lil Nas X is getting now, and he's standing in the fire right with it, just like, we saw him at the VMAs last night being pretty sarcastic about all this nonsense, but I think that toxic, like MJ just said, it's complicated, but at the end of the day, I think toxic masculinity, the tendency of do, consume, push, that is also synonymous with capitalism, individualism, just the same. And now we're just kind of flipping words around depending on where or who we're applying it to. And the last thing I'll say is that toxic masculinity or domination, and I see this a lot in activist communities in particular, people who are not men, born, biologically men, can also embody toxic masculinity and can embody principles of capitalism, which is consume, and dominate. And when we get this idea locked into our heads that we belong to this group, or that group, then we think it absolves us from certain tendencies or certain things, which is the same problem on the flip side of men who say, oh, if I cry, then that means that I'm gay. And it's not that, I am gay and I'm trying to suppress it. Even the possibility, I'm not even going to entertain. It's just this pushing away of anything that makes me feel or look less powerful in this society that thrives on power. Very, very complicated, but I'm excited to get into how this applies to emotional experience as well. But then again, my own experience, I'm a man projecting right now. I'm not a woman, so if I offend anybody, I'm sorry. I do not know.
So you all brought up some really good points, and you talked about this idea of power and dominance being a part of toxic masculinity, and we talk about this traditional masculine ideal, right? Like there's this specific thing that we have encountered in society as how a man is supposed to act, and how that carries into their interactions and things like that. Are there any to help? There could be people watching today that this is new to them, like they haven't gone into this or thought about what it meant. Can you all provide, are there any examples of toxic masculinity that you have seen or encountered, even personally, if you're willing to share that? Is there anything on that way to kind of give people a picture of what this looks like practically? And Broderick, I'll start with you since we have a flip.
Yeah, I'll give you two particular examples, and they're very subtle. They're almost, you want to think about forks in the road, right? So I'll be sitting with another person, okay? And they ask me how my day's going or how I'm doing, right? And through meditation practice, I can see this happening inside of me. There's this strong pull to, in that moment, if I'm having a bad day, say, you know what, I'm not feeling too good. I need to rest. had this difficult family issue, or I had, this going on and I'm kind of feeling like this. So naturally, that's what will want to come out of me. And I can feel myself pulling that way. Toxic masculinity is shoving that down and then saying, I'm cool, I'm chilling, I'm good, I'm Gucci, da da da. And that can be laughter, and I can pull, I can talk about something in a way that brings humor into the picture rather than real authentic emotion. I can get angry at the person asking me about the emotion. But anything to get away from that authentic feeling of the embodiment of actual emotion. And one thing I tell people a lot is there's two things you can know about humans. They're very anxious and they think a lot, and they're very, very, very sensitive, regardless of gender. That sensitivity is there. So any sort of ducking away from sensitivity and emotion, and just that, more so, I call it my water channel, the flow, that state, men in particular, and masculinity in particular, tries to really squash that and just move forward and go. And then that leads to other things like substance use and just numbing, workaholism. I'm thinking a homie on the airport who I seen with his headphones on, just blaring, like trying to like maintain his rage for some reason, but just, this is what I think a man is supposed to be, so I'm going to just try to hold this up really hard. You feel it forcing into the space or forcing into oneself. So I hope that wasn't too abstract. I'm trying to get nice and broad.
No, perfect. It's perfect. Manny, I'm going to toss it to you.
I'm going to give maybe like a more clear example, and then maybe something more subtle. So more clear, the term misogynoir. So violence against Black women in particular. So I think there are a number of men, and I'm going to focus on Black men, who would say, like, I would never be violent towards a Black woman. Okay, I believe you. Mm-hmm. However, do you listen to Black women? Will you let a Black woman, and I'm using the word let very loosely, lead you? Yeah. Will you follow the lead of a Black woman? Will you sit back and shut up and just follow her? Let her talk, hear her ideas, even better, support her ideas. Check in on how she's doing, and go with her energy and the way she's letting things turn out, because very often that looks very different than the way I might do something if I just sit back, right, and fight that urge. So the urge is like to jump and take charge, right? Because and I think it might come from the way we're raised, because the way I was raised, I had to be in charge. I've been working since I was 5 years old. You got to work. You got to do your thing. You got to be strong. You stand up to the bullies. You do your thing. Women might have a very different way of approaching things. So what I see that I think is also, it seems really obvious, but it can be subtle, is an unwillingness to honor women and to uplift women, in particular Black women, because Black women get the worst of it. So I think that's a really toxic trait that just is like in our DNA. There's just this unwillingness in our society. It's not modeled well. When the reality is, if you look at like who's really doing things right now, it's Black women. Black women are really leading
for sure
everything. Black mental health was started by Black women, and the team is primarily Black women. So there's that part. The other part, I was just talking to two people for some interviews for Black Mental Health Week, and they both said something similar. So one was a Black woman, one was a Black man. And she said it, and then he gave me an example that matched. What she said was, she's lately encouraging people to be less resilient. So I thought that was really interesting. Be less resilient. And what she focused on was this idea that because we're so strong, people can just abuse us and do whatever they want to us. And so she started to encourage people to, don't buy into this idea that we need to be so resilient and strong that we don't need care, that we don't need to take care of ourselves. And so I have a friend, Rock, that I interviewed for Black Mental Health Week, who's doing some yoga. He's a yoga teacher and owns a studio. And he went to Rikers to teach yoga to Black men in Rikers, and they were like, you're gay, you're weak. What are you doing? And he got a lot of flack for that. So there's two sides to that. One is that seems like a really obvious form of Black toxic masculinity. His response, though, could have also been toxic, but it wasn't. You know, his response could have been like, screw you guys. You know, I'm going to leave you behind. I'm going to move ahead with other people that are more sensitive. So forgetting our Black men is also a form of toxic masculinity because they've been programmed in a certain way, because they've had, and being unwilling to understand that there's a person in there. Right. So you might see rage, you might see anger. My brother is a gang member. He's in the Crips. I grew up around this stuff. Right. Those are people. Those Black men are people. Right. And so not being fooled by that. And he changed his approach. He changed his approach to talk about the health benefits, to talk about meditation, because he understood them. You know, meditation is kind of like what happens in martial arts. So why don't I talk about it that way? They feel stress. Why don't I talk about reducing stress? Why does it have to be presented the way it's presented in other conditions? So, you know, that just happened today. So it's really got me thinking like, you know, we can also be toxic by just being like, you're toxic. We haven't changed anything. We haven't changed the energy, right? So that's why I like talking about feminism and feminine energy. There's this pulling in, there's this compassion, there's this love and this healing. And so I think by doing both, you know, pointing less and really trying to reach out and understand these men and what they're going through, and I'm including myself, you know, people who just live a life that you can't imagine it if you don't live it. Mm-hmm. I don't have to tell you to. We got 3 big Black dudes. You know, we walk down the street.
Yeah.
You just get treated a certain way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I definitely want to, you know, hit on your point, man. You talked about like, you know, how we, you know, display ourselves, but also how we, you know, deal with ourselves in certain situations, particularly with Black women. And again, a lot of this comes from, you know, societal pieces and what we've, you know, been given when we were, you know, kind of growing up, whether either directly or indirectly, right? Like it's not some of it, like my parents and, you know, my dad never taught me, you know, any of this stuff like that, but socially, social cues did, right? You know, not him, but society. And so, you know, as a part of that, you know, like I always, like I talk about this story. I think I was mentioned in another video, but essentially, like when my wife and I were going through marital counseling, we had to get to the topic of money and finances. Not my forte. I have not been a good steward of, you know, of money and finances. You know, especially at this level when we're combining and things. And my wife has. I mean, historically, she just has. She bought, you know, purchased a house, you know, really young in her, you know, like mid-20s, and you know, all the stuff that she's been able to accomplish financially, like, you know, again, I hope she doesn't mind me saying credit score crazy, like all this kind of stuff, right? And when we got to that point, like I was so guarded with my mistakes and my finances because typically, you know, societal wise, like men are supposed to be good with money, right? We're supposed to be able to handle, you know, the finances and things. And instead of, you know, like understanding where my weakness was, seeing where her strengths were, and kind of meeting in the middle and learning and growing, like naturally, like it was more of a like I'm just going to be so guarded to the point that I'm going to push you off, right? Like I have to like keep you from this because this is I can't expose this vulnerability because that's not where this dynamic is supposed to be. And you know, in time, like I learned and, you know, was able to, you know, grow into that and be better with that. But it took time. And a lot of that was because of toxic masculinity. Like I felt like I was a guy, like I was supposed to be good with the money. And it was like, dude, you're trash, own it. And then learn and figure that out. And so, you know, that's how it presents itself. And so I want to get into that too, with as much as you all are comfortable. Like, how is this played into, you know, you all moving and existing, you know, in this world, you know, as two people who present as Black male, right? As Black men. Like how has this, you know, toxic masculinity played into, you know, just your existence, you know, as human beings? How has this, you know, kind of come up with as much as you're willing to share?
Yo, like, get real, y'all. Like, I come from like 30 minutes outside New York City, you know. Growing up, I was a teenager, you know, 1999 into like, you know what I mean? Like 05, 06. So there's very much a grit to me in particular, that some say reflects toxic, toxic masculinity. But I would say that toxicity for me, it depends on when you're applying the energy, in what context, and who are you affecting. Because for me personally, like, I wouldn't be here unless I was able to sometimes like shut off my emotions, like real talk. And there were years where I couldn't feel emotion. Um, and I don't know, people listening might find that as sad, but like, like I said, I wouldn't be here if I didn't have that in me. And also I think that, what does the literature call it? Cool pose in black men, which is basically just narcissism, without me being able to hype myself up in certain moments when, parents weren't as emotionally attuned to me, didn't really have that, that nurturing, very gritty blue collar Northeast. So I didn't really get that, always playing ball, or listening to music and rap. Like, the models of men were always very rah, 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 go, 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 strong, strong, strong. That got me to a certain point until I started to have substance use issues. I started to notice a lot of issues in my relationships where, AKA like the narcissism and inability to connect and empathize with people. And I'm just not talking about just my relationships romantically with women, also just relationships with friends and family members. You start to, things, at least for me, my suffering and pain due to my defensive behavior that promoted a lot of resilience and ability to achieve where I'm at, that had to start hurting me and hurting the people around me in order for me to actually see it and be like, oh crap, this is good sometimes. This isn't good all the time. Because for me, I'm lightning rod in terms of charisma, engagement, and all of that. And I do think that is because I am a man, and sometimes I'll be in spaces and I'll know, that people are more likely to listen to me, as a man. So these days now, what I try to do is try to really just stay in my heart and pay attention mostly to my emotion from moment to moment. And that is the only way, at least for me, that I found that I can still use a lot of the what don't call it, weapons, that and grit that I learned and got me to this point. But my heart has to run the show. It has to run the show. And that involves a lot of spiritual practices and meditative practices that really ground me and allow me to see, oh crap, like when you said that thing, you might have silenced this person or that person, or it might involve me asking more questions and sort of trying to become more conscious. Because I know when I step out into the world, all of the more so toxic leaning kind of stuff, the imbalanced stuff, it will always revert me back to the mean of what males are taught to present like in the society. So I have a relative kind of paranoia about me. And I think this also doubles with my teaching on white allyship sometimes. So a lot of stuff that I'll tell them is the same thing I tell me. Like, hey, you walking around with a big privileged hula hoop and you're bumping people into the corners. You know what I'm saying? So it's your job to hold that hula hoop back, because society reinforces me for speaking and punishes women, for not taking up that space. So I have to hold that in my in the back of my head. But also I know what grit got me and where it put me. Like, bro, like that Wu-Tang sword style like attitude, like that sometimes like I have to like get myself hype, to charge it up. But again, it's just staying in the heart and just perspective taking again and again, knowing that you have those blind spots, knowing that society reinforces those blind spots. But for me, that's as far as I got so far,
No, but that's critical, and I think that's a good message here, is that understanding and taking that time to learn where your blind spots are and to learn where your privilege is, as a part of it is definitely, you know, a point of this is understanding how you're able to deal with it and how it benefits you and how it can, damage other people. Because I think it's critical for us to take inventory, especially those who are, us who are, heterosexual males, just, like just understanding where that privilege is and to understanding that we may be putting, women against the corners and others, especially a part of the LGBTQ plus community, as we're able to do this because there's privilege there and there's a natural distance, especially I think for heterosexual black men, of the word privilege, right? Like there's a natural like that's not me. Like where am I privileged? Like as a black man, like where am I privileged with some of the things that we're seeing? And I've had these conversations where like privilege is relative, right? It depends on what situation, what room, where you are, and who you're around, where your privileges lie. And and I think doing that in the work that you're talking about and unlearning a societal piece takes a long time, especially one as you've described, one that was a protective factor for you growing up. And so I think like, understanding and giving people the grace to unlearn these things is a part of this process for sure. And Manny, I'm gonna toss it to you.
So I always love going after Broderick because he says things so well that I can just add a little bit. So everything Broderick said I relate to a lot. However, my early life was extremely violent. So extreme violence in the home. Like I said, my brother's involved with gangs, the Crips, and other people. So uh, I got to the point where I liked the violence. I was good at defending myself and others. And so I got something out of that. Unlearning that, it's been a very long process to take that off the table as an option completely. Especially, thankfully, it never seeped into my intimate relationships with women or anything like that. Thankfully, however, that feeling you get, that like, I could just stomp this person out right now,
Mhm.
be done with the problem. That's not an option. That's not a viable option. Although I understand the feelings behind it. So that's one part of it. The thing I want to talk about is a little more personal and uncomfortable. And since we're here, I figured I'd do it. I read in this book, All About Love, Bell Hooks, which can be a very difficult thing to read if you're struggling with toxic masculinity because you think you understand love. She talked about how men will spend their entire lives thinking it's okay to lie to women
Mm.
and that we think we can be close to other people and gain power by lying, and that we justify it in many different ways. And I have to say, it's difficult looking back that I spent a lot of time in intimate relationships with women where lying was just a part of who I was. I was
Mhm.
lying, like not only lying in ways like cheating on people, which I've done and really embarrassed about and shameful of, and hurting people in that way. Deeper ways too. So, like I talked about before, just recently in November, realizing that there's this whole other part of me. I identify as non-binary, a two-spirit person. That I identify as Jade. So Manny, everybody knows me as Manny. But there's this whole other energy, and it's very, very present. This energy
Mhm.
that I call Jade, and lying to myself to the point where I didn't even really recognize this person consciously. However, I had a lot of things written with this character, Jade, that just made sense about my life. And it was only until I was living in a sublet where there were queer Black people and it felt safe and I had a safe partner who was curious about the things I had written that I discovered this whole other part of myself. And I was 47 at the time. I'm 48 now. So
Mhm.
like, like I'm coming to terms with like living for almost 50 years, being really detached from a super important part of who I am. And it's really hard to talk about it,
Mhm.
honestly, because there's a lot of fear wrapped up in what does that mean? What does that
Yeah.
mean that
Yeah.
there's this jade energy in me? Does it mean that I'm less than I was before? I actually believe that I'm more than I was before. However, in the public,
Right.
it may not be viewed that way. And so I categorize that under honesty because it was never a part of my relationships. It was never a part of how I related to other people. And I was terrified that it would have a negative effect. It's actually enhanced my relationship quite a bit. but it's all under that umbrella of not being honest, particularly with women, and gaining strength and advantage that way. That's something that I'm still working on, catching myself not wanting to say something as subtle as, I don't feel good, the way Broderick said, or something more important about something sexual or something about my, fundamental personality and wellness, that I really should communicate honestly with a partner and allow that person then to know who I really am. I mean, allow them to have their own response to it. One of the things my partner said that really like shook me into some sense was, why don't you let me have my response? Why are you responding for me?
Wow.
Right? Why don't you let me, then you'll know me. Then we can have a real relationship. So that one for me is still like, I get tingly when I talk about it. It's one of the more subtle ones that I think a lot of us fall into and have to really practice getting out of.
Well, I definitely want to, thank you for your, openness and willingness to share that. I know, you talked about that, still being a difficult, thing to talk about. So we, definitely appreciate you being willing to do that. And I think what you've, outlined and illustrated is that toxic masculinity, oftentimes we talk about it as this external phenomenon of, dominance and power over someone else. Like there has to be, there's a victim in toxic masculinity and there's like a perpetrator kind of dynamic. But I think what you've outlined is that there's an internal toxic masculinity that we have, really ingested as a part of how we move and operate. Whereas, you're saying like, there was fear, there's nervousness, there's these things that you're grappling with a part of you that you have said is very real, and that a part of you that is you've known is very real. And so I think one of the things, as a takeaway, I think for anybody listening to this, is really that there is also an internal toxic masculinity that guides our thoughts and our decisions, even if those decisions are only impacting us. That there's this level of I have to, present this way. Like, where are people going to go with this? And where we've internalized that I can't be my full self because my full self may not be accepted, and the rejection is something that I don't want to deal with. And so I think this inner work that both of you have outlined is really critical, and I want people to take that as like a key takeaway with this is it takes time to unlearn. It takes time to come to grips with those things that we've dealt with as a society. And so it's important for us to work on unlearning it, because there's a freedom, I think, in unlearning these things and being able to be your 100% authentic self. So I wanted to clear that. So thank you both for your openness and your honesty with that. And so this is the Black Mental Wellness Lounge, so we gotta click it to mental health, even though we have the whole time, but we're just gonna make it real plain as well. But how does toxic masculinity like play into mental health? Like, where is the intersection of toxic masculinity in mental health?
I would say it has a lot to do with that refocusing on the inner work rather than focusing on the external stuff. It's working on the inner stuff. So I think cognitive behavioral therapy is good and helpful. Okay.
Mhm.
But sometimes it's short term. It's kind of like raking up the leaves in the yard. Let's just stop your behaviors. You know what I mean? And that's not, limited to CBT. That's also just like society, oh, you're doing that? That's bad. We're going to cancel you now. So we're going to punish you and shame you into behavioral change. Think about that. It sounds like an oxymoron. So for men in therapy, I think my main piece of advice, and I'm in therapy right now, is getting in touch with your true self and your authentic reactions, and learning the difference between your authentic emotional reactions and what society has trained you to say. Okay. I've learned for myself personally that these outward facing defense mechanisms that I was born into right? So I'm born, I'm born with a penis. So now I like blue, and I like rap, and you know what I mean, and I play ball, and all this different stuff. All this stuff is projected onto me, even ways of handling emotion. So now what I like to practice for myself is knowing when to turn it on, when to turn it off. If I sense that people are feeling in a room, if they're feeling like down, they're not feeling confident, I'm like, oh snap, like I'm a masculine presenting male who can like uplift and inspire, and let me just magnetize the space and woo and sort of lift it up. And then so I'm using the masculinity and defenses in a way that services society, makes the world a better place. Sigmund Freud called this sublimation, sublimating energy. So when you become self-aware and you become aware of the differences in how you're feeling and how you're acting, then you can start to tune in more so with that inner space and become emotionally aware. When you become emotionally aware, naturally your empathy starts to come in too, because you can feel how you're making other people feel based on your knowledge of how you feel on the inside. So when somebody says something to you that's offensive, or whatever it is, even if it's minimal, if you're trained in toxic masculinity, you're like, shit, I don't care, that don't bother me, da 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 da. So if you can detect the difference between your surface level response and then feel like, oh man, yo, that should really hurt my feelings, like, oh, I feel some type of way. Honor both reactions, honor both. That helped me on one side be able to identify the behaviors I would do outwardly when I felt certain things. So now when I feel shame, I know that I do this. When I feel sad, I know that I do that. So it's unconscious. So then sometimes when I couldn't feel my feelings, what I would do is I would look for the thing that I was doing to clue me into, oh, Broderick, you probably feeling like this, but masculinity just taught you to like suppress this feeling. And I'm like, oh crap. So I don't have to bare my soul to the world. I can just know how I'm feeling and bare my soul to my therapist. And I think for me, and still for me, because I'm so masculine presenting, and it's gotten me a lot in the world, because of privilege, and because of just, sometimes I think for Black men in particular, it's the only defense you have. But I think it's knowing who is driving the horse. The horse, you have to ride the horse. The horse can't ride you. And whatever defense you're using, whether it's masculinity, perfectionism, you know what I mean, people pleasing, different things like that. It's just knowing the difference between the defensiveness, what it means, and also just deepening that true emotional awareness. But that's what I would really say. The intersection of mental health really is just blocking emotions. You're trained to only feel anger or nothing or humor, and that's it. It's so limited, to the point where I think for myself, I follow my angry reactions because I know there's something behind them. So my masculinity in society has conditioned me to the point where sometimes my anger to me means hurt. It means sadness, but I don't have as much ready-made access because I've been gaslit out of feeling those emotions. And when you grow up, 33 now, if you're conditioned over time that long with something and that many societal representations of what you should be, those emotions get numb. And a lot of people, and especially in my experience of Black men, we're really numb to a lot of those more vulnerable emotions. We can talk generational trauma too, and how a lot of that stuff was just beat out of us and traumatized out of us. But yeah, that intersection, I think it's all due to emotional awareness. And for me, it was really loaded into just starting a meditation practice, and then that just sort of unfolded, got into contact with therapy, finally opened the bell hooks so she could talk shit to me, show me myself for real. I had to be ready to feel those things. So yeah, I'll stop it there.
No, that is awesome, Manny. I'm about to toss it to you.
I I've been listening to everything we're saying, and I got this image in my head of us being in a prison. And what we're in a prison from is our own natural state, um, which our natural state is to be connected to others. So our natural state is a state of love, and um, or we could say community, because community is, love among a group of people. So think about, if you're not even being honest with yourself, then you're really out of touch with your natural state in the most wild way imaginable, because you're not even yourself. You're not even comfortable being yourself alone when no one else is around. And then to add to that, you're not comfortable being yourself to the people that you're supposed to be the closest to. And so how can love develop in a relationship like that? It's not really possible. Bell Hooks is good about talking about relationships that might have respect, affection, care, but not love. Right. And so we might spend our whole lives thinking we're loving or can form healthy, loving relationships. And we can't even do it with ourselves, because we can't even reach into the feelings. Broderick's talking about not being able to feel things. I spent such a long time of my life dealing with that trauma of not being able to feel things. Broderick also mentioned annihilate. It's interesting. My Grandmother's Hands, that book, talks about concept of, in trauma, there's like fight or flight or freeze. And he said that he noticed in a lot of the Black community, there's this annihilate kind of like response. Just, I'm going to eliminate the threat completely. So having in your brain this idea, this misconception that everything is really dangerous, and so I have to annihilate it. Right. So then what do? You're alone in the world. You're alone in this prison. You can't even tell the truth to the people that you're close to. And so no one ever really knows you, and you don't even really know yourself, which sounds so lonely. Right. And I think maybe what I was thinking about, how do we present ourselves sometimes? I had this image of a knight wearing all of that armor, walking around. You're like, no, I'm fine. I'm getting around, but I'm safe. Right. But how do you hug somebody with armor on?
Right.
How do you feel, the touch of the sun on your skin, and like other person's skin touching you? So there's all of this intimacy and love that it's easy to just kind of shrug off, possibly, but that is the essence of life. It's being connected to ourselves and others. So it's really a prison. It's a really terrible prison, very lonely prison, the more I think about it.
Absolutely. And we're talking about denying ourselves, as individuals, and we also are denying our healing, right? Like, we're denying ourselves growth, healing, and reaching our full potentials, because we're in this space of being lonely, being so isolated, as a part of that. So really great points. And listen, we could go on for this for forever. Look, we're going to have to talk about doing a part 2, not to put you all on blast, but again, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But I want to from each of you, if I could get one thing that we can do, because a lot of what we're talking about it in our younger selves, right? Like, we're talking about at a younger age that we've grown up with, that we've developed with, that has become kind of ironed into us, like, and reinforced as we become older, for a number of different reasons that we've talked about today. What is one thing that you feel like we should be doing as we're bringing up those behind us, our younger generation? What should we be doing, saying, instilling with them to start to change, some of this toxic masculinity as as they are developing and growing up? And Manny, if I could start with you, that would be awesome.
Sure. So I'm in a forensic psychology program, so I use legal language sometimes. I love this idea of reasonable doubt. So in court, if a lawyer can put reasonable doubt in the mind of a judge and a jury, even with a lot of evidence that something is true, it will be dismissed, right? Ideally, unless you're Black, then you're going to prison. Right? But ideally, the concept I like, and so I love the idea of building reasonable doubt. I talk about it with my clients a lot. Can you just, right? Can you start with just saying, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe it's true, but is this true too? Could there be another truth here? Right? So just that little bit of doubt, right? And we can do that a lot of ways. We can spend time with ourselves building in like my ideas of love. Bell hooks created a lot of reasonable doubt. Like, I thought that was love, but I don't know, man. That's not really stacking up to what she presented, which sounds great. And then in our modeling, in our behavior. So one of the reasons that I'm 48 and I'm like, yes, I'm non-binary and two-spirit. I'm using different pronouns, and I changed my name to Manny Jade, is because they like the fear. It just shrinks. Like it feels like it would shrink me down really small. But more important than that is that I believe in this community that we have, and I try to imagine a different future. Right? And part of Afrofuturism, part of abolition is reimagining what we believe and who we are. And so I just create reasonable doubt, create it yourself, create it in your conversations with others, in your relationships with others. Most of all, see if we can model it, right? Why not see, like Broderick talked about a lot, just try it out. Why can't we just try, just see, right? And then if that can create a little bit of like, that reasonable doubt in my life has saved me every single time. Every single time I've been stuck and couldn't see a way out, my ability to say, maybe this isn't it. Maybe this is not what I thought it was. Maybe I'm not who I thought I was. Maybe there's a different way to solve this problem or deal with this conflict. It's particularly hard for me in conflict because I just want to, annihilate. Like, especially when people are hurting my people, right? And hurting vulnerable people. It's like, I'm big and strong. I just wipe you out. Well, that's just one way to think. So reasonable doubt for me is what I'm working on.
Awesome. Brad?
Yes, sir. What do we need for the next generation coming up? I would say two things, but they're related. Two concepts to understand. One, K through 12 emotional intelligence courses. You need to understand the difference between what you're presenting to the outside world for healthy boundaries, right? Not for suppression, not repressing emotion, but just healthy boundaries. Like, here's like my public things. Then when I get alone, this is my emotional self. Knowing the difference between those two things, and taking care of emotion as if it's health. Just like we talk about diversity and inclusion, it needs to be throughout everything. Same thing with emotional intelligence. Two is relative reality. It is the metaphysical version of what Einstein said and has in math. You look at reality one way, and then you turn it or you stand a different way, and then it looks different. This is true when it comes to me thinking about how this particular episode went. I'll think on the one hand, I do this, on the other hand, this, on the other hand, reality is like a prism. It's not linear, and there are different interpretations. This, I think, in my opinion, sort of creates the automatic reasonable doubt, because that, wait, this is my opinion that I'm projecting into here unconsciously, and I don't know exactly. And I think that a lot of masculinity in our culture, and I'm naming that with individualism, capitalism, it projects and reproduces itself as a cultural phenomenon, not just within males. It's within everything. So if there's anything that listeners can take away here, and I don't want to I don't want to get canceled. We have to keep in mind that toxic masculinity is something that comes with dehumanizing other people. And something I see a lot in activist communities is the same thing that happens with Black men, I think. Oh, well, I've suffered and I've been victimized, so it's impossible for me to victimize others. So if a man in society doesn't understand toxic masculinity, now we're canceling him and we're saying you should educate yourself. But hold on a second. So you're talking about collectivism and you're talking about liberated systems which educate, and everything's more coming from a communistic sort of way. But then you're like holding this dude over the flame like he was supposed to educate himself. There's balance. We need balance. It's not about one thing or another. It's about balance in a way that doesn't remove the humanity from anybody. We need accountability, but I think we need to investigate ourselves in how we're playing out or acting out certain concepts that were projected onto us in society and get more curious. I'm not claiming to know, because I have a crap ton of blind spots, especially as a man in this space. So don't get it twisted. Like, I'm not 100% sure. All I'm saying is when we're pointing the finger at people and saying, you should change, you should change, you should change. You're saying, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. If you don't like when white people say that to you, you know, that's for me. I think it's learning how we can promote the humanity of people so that our Black men later on are not so numb. So it makes more sense. We're getting missed, you know, because the tone needs to have some sort of like, that's why I couldn't listen to Pema Chodron. Like when I was first meditating, she's like love and flowers and this and that. And I was just like, like I couldn't like relate to it. Talking Trump boy, this dude was like, all right, bro, this is like what you need to know, bro. So stop like da-da-da-da. I was like, all right, cool. We need to promote those capacities in our boys to be able to then reach that. I'm doing the reverse. I have to go back into my heart. We need to start that from the beginning. I think that would create a more perspective-taking, nuance-based sort of society that automatically allowed for that reasonable doubt. That's the best I got so far. That'll change like tomorrow.
No, I love it. And I think humanity is a good place for us to, you know, to wrap up in this. And is that's what we need. We need you know, humanity, and it takes into unlearning these things and taking time to, you know, do that inner work to be able to understand how we're projecting to others. And if we can do that with our younger kids, and I think it definitely can have some weight to it. Thank you both so much for jumping on. Like this has been absolutely awesome. Like I said, I'm not pushing for a part 2, but I'm just going to plant the seed, and whatever happens. Like we'll go with that. But I appreciate the collaboration of you know, Black and Mental Health and the Black Mental Wellness Lounge. You all have been very supportive of me. You know, I love being supportive of you all as well. And so I appreciate all of you all have done. And if you can just tell people how to get in touch with you, if they want to follow you on socials, if you all could drop that really quick, we'll be good to go.
Sure. So to follow me on Instagram or Twitter, you can follow me at Manny Jade Garcia. So MANIJADE Garcia, all together. To follow Black and Mental Health, it's Black in MH, letter M, letter H, on Instagram and Twitter. MannyGarcia.com, and we have blackandmentalhealth.com coming out soon, so you can find us there very soon. Yes.
I love it. Roderick.
Yes, sir. Along with what MJ just said, especially about our website, I'm hyped about that. We're gonna have some fresh content on there too. Facts, bro. Content, bro. Digital age. That's all it is, man. But you can find me on Twitter at Dr. Brod Sawyer, Instagram Dr. Brod 123, and then also on my website, different inquiries and different things like that. BroderickSawyer.com.
Thank you both so much. We're going to end here. Thank you for jumping on, and look forward to the rest of the events on Black and Mental Health Week. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, sir.